Good morrow, scholars. Welcome back to Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. Now, this chapter is almost 30 pages or so, so we're going to be here for a good long while. We are in chapter 13. Yay! Page 438. 6 Imperial stormtroopers guarded Lando, Leia, and Chewbacca as they marched through the inner corridor of Cloud City. They reached an intersection with 12 of Lando's guards and his aide arrived to block their path. When 12... Okay. Code 47, Lando commanded as he stopped in front of his aide. I'd just like to point out that I don't have a Billy D. Williams voice, so forgive me for that. Although, if you would like to have me put up a video of me doing impressions of every single character, that would be fun. At that moment, the 12 guards aimed their laser weapons at the startled stormtroopers, and Lando's aide calmly took the 6 troopers' weapons from them. He handed one of the guns to Leia and one to Lando, then waited for the next order. Hold them in the security tower, the Cloud City administrator said. Quietly, no one must know. The guards and Lando's aide, carrying the extra weapons, marched the stormtroopers away to the tower. Leia had watched this rapid turn of events in confusion, but her confusion turned to astonishment when Lando, the man who had betrayed Han Solo, began removing Chewbacca's bonds. Come on, he urged, we're getting out of here. The Wookiee's giant hands were freed at last. Not caring to wait for explanations, Chewbacca turned toward the man who had freed him and, with a blood-curdling roar, lunged at Lando and began to throttle him. After what you did to Han, Leia said, I wouldn't trust you to... Lando, desperately trying to free himself from Chewbacca's ferocious grip, tried to explain. I had no choice, he began, but the Wookiee interrupted him with an angry bark. There's still a chance to save Han, Lando gasped. They're at the east platform. Chewie, Leia said at last, let's go. Still fuming, and Chewbacca released Lando and glared at him as Calrissian fought to regain his breath. Keep your eyes on him, Chewie, Leia cautioned as the Wookiee growled threateningly. I have a feeling, Lando muttered under his breath, that I'm making another big mistake. The stout little R2 unit meandered up and down the corridor, sending his scanners in every possible direction as he tried to detect some sign of his master, or any kind of life. He realized he was dreadfully turned around and had lost track of how many meters he had traveled. How does a robot do that? I understand me doing that, but how does a robot? As R2-D2 turned a corner and he spotted a number of forms moving up the corridor, beeping and whistling droid greetings, he hoped that these were friendly sorts. His beeping was detected by one of the creatures who began to call out to him. R2, R2, it was 3PO. Chewbacca, still carrying the semi-assembled C-3PO, quickly turned around to see the stubby R2 droid rolling their way. But as the Wookiee turned, 3PO was spun out of sight of his friend. Wait, the aggravated 3PO demanded. Turn around, you woolly... R2, hurry, they're trying to save Han from the bounty hunter. R2 scooted forward, beeping all the way, and 3PO patiently replied to his frantic questions. Oh, Master Luke can take care of himself. At least, that was what C-3PO kept telling himself as the group continued its search for Han. On the east landing platform of Cloud City, 2 guards shoved the frozen body of Han Solo through a side hatchway of the Slave One. Boba Fett climbed up a ladder next to the opening and boarded his ship, ordering it sealed as soon as he entered the cockpit. Fett ignited his ship's engines, and the craft began rolling across the platform for takeoff. Lando, Leia, and Chewbacca raced onto the platform in time only to see the Slave One lifting off and soaring into the orange and purple of the Cloud City sunset. Raising his blaster, Chewbacca howled and fired the weapon at the parting spaceship. It's no use, Lando told him. They're out of range. All but C-3PO gazed at the departing craft. Still strapped to Chewbacca's back, he saw something the others had not yet noticed. Oh my, no! He exclaimed. Charging the group was a squad of Imperial stormtroopers, blasts already issuing from the drawn blasters. The first bolts narrowly missed Princess Leia, and Lando responded quickly in returning enemy fire. and the air was ablaze with a brilliant crisscross of red and green laser bolts. R2 scooted over the platform's elevator and hid inside, peeking out to see the fury of the battle from a safe distance. Lando shouted above the sounds of the blasters. Thank you. Oh, do forgive me. I had a rough night last night. Come on, let's move, he called, breaking for the open elevator and blasting at the stormtroopers as he ran. But Leia and Chewbacca did not move. They stood their ground and kept up a steady fire against the assault of stormtroopers. Troopers groaned and dropped as their chests, arms, and stomachs erupted under the fatally accurate aim of this one female human and one male Wookiee. Lando, sticking his head out of the elevator, tried to get their attention, motioning them to run, but the two seemed possessed as they blasted away, getting retaliation for all of their anger and captivity, and the loss of one they both loved. They were determined to extinguish the lives of these minions of the Galactic Empire. 3PO would gladly have been anywhere else. Unable to get away, all he could do was frantically yell for help. R2, help me, he screamed. How did I get into this? What a fate worse than death it is to be strapped to the back of a Wookiee. Get in here, Lando shouted again. Hurry up! Hurry up! Leia and Chewbacca began to move toward him, evading the erupting rain of laser fire as they rushed inside the waiting elevator. As the elevator's doors closed, they glimpsed the remaining troopers racing at them. Lightsabers clashed in Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader's battle on the platform above the carbon freezing chamber. Luke felt the shaking platform shudder with every blow and parry and thrust of their weapons, but he was undaunted, for with every thrust of his sword he drove the evil Darth Vader back. Vader, using his lightsaber to ward off Luke's aggressive lunges, spoke calmly as they fought. The fear does not reach you. You have learned more than I anticipated. You'll find I'm full of surprises, the confident youth retorted, threatening Vader with yet another thrust. And I, too, was the calm reply. With two graceful moves, the Dark Lord hooked Luke's weapon out of his hands and sent it flying away. A flash of Vader's energy blade at Luke's feet made the youth jump back in an effort to protect himself, but he stumbled backward and tumbled down the stairs. Sprawled on the platform, Luke gazed up and saw the ominous figure looming at him at the top of the stairs. Then the figure flew right at him, its sable cloak billowing out in the air like the wings of a monstrous bat. Yeah. I should have worn a Batman shirt. Quickly, Luke rolled to one side, not taking his eyes off Vader, as the vast black figure landed soundlessly next to him. Your future lies with me, Skywalker, Vader hissed, looming over the crouching youth. Now you will embrace the dark side. Obi-Wan knew this to be true. No, Luke yelled, trying to fight off the evil presence. There is much Obi-Wan did not tell you, Vader continued. Come, I will complete your training. Vader's influence was incredibly strong. It seemed to Luke like a thing alive. Don't listen to him, Luke told himself. He's trying to trick me, to lead me astray, to lead me to the dark side of the Force, just like Ben warned me. You should always listen to Ben. Wait. Luke began to back away from the advancing Sith Lord. Behind the youth, the hydraulic elevator cover silently opened, ready to receive him. What? I'll die first, Luke proclaimed. That won't be necessary. The Dark Lord suddenly lunged at Luke with his lightsaber, so forcefully that the youth lost his balance and tumbled into the gaping opening. Vader turned away from the freezing pit and casually deactivated his lightsaber. All too easy, he shrugged. Perhaps you are not as strong as the Emperor thought. As he spoke, molten metal began to pour into the opening behind him, and while his back was still turned, something rose in a blur upward. Time will tell, Luke quietly replied to Vader's remark. The Dark Lord spun around. At this point in the freezing process, the subject certainly shouldn't be able to speak. Vader glanced around the room and then turned his helmeted head up toward the ceiling. Hanging from some hoses draped across the ceiling, Luke was suspended, having leapt some 5 meters into the air to escape the carbonite. Impressive, Vader admitted. Your agility is impressive. Luke dropped back to the platform on the other side of the steaming pit. He reached his hand out, and his sword, lying on another part of the platform, flew back into his grip. Immediately, the lightsaber ignited. Vader's sword sprang to life at the very same moment. Ben has taught you well. You have controlled your fear. Now release your anger. I destroyed your family. Take your revenge. I like the differences in the dialogue, but at the same time, I'm also sad. But this time Luke was cautious and more controlled. If he could subdue his anger, he had finally controlled the sphere. Wait, excuse me. As he had finally controlled the sphere, he would not be swayed. Remember the training, Luke cautioned himself. Remember what Yoda taught. Cast out all hatred and anger and receive the Force. Gaining control over his negative feelings, Luke began to advance, ignoring Vader's goading. He lunged at Vader and after a quick exchange began to force him back. Your hatred can give you the power to destroy me, Vader tempted. Use it. Luke began to realize just how awesomely powerful this dark enemy was, and softly told himself, I will not become a slave to the dark side of the Force, and moved cautiously toward Vader. As Luke approached, Vader slowly moved backward in retreat. Luke lunged at him with a powerful swing, but when Vader blocked it, he lost his balance and fell into the outer rim of steaming pipes. Luke's knees nearly buckled with the exhaustion of battling this fearsome opponent. He gathered his strength and cautiously moved to the edge and looked down, but he saw no sign of Vader. Switching off his lightsaber and hooking it to his belt, Luke lowered himself into the pit. He dropped to the floor of the pit and found himself in a large control and maintenance room that overlooked the reactor powering the entire city. Looking around the chamber, he noticed a large window. Standing silhouetted in front of it was the unmoving figure of Darth Vader. Luke slowly moved closer to the window and reignited his lightsaber. But Vader did not light his own sword, nor did he make any effort to defend himself as Luke drew nearer. The Dark Lord's only weapon, in fact, was his tempting voice. Attack, he goaded the young Jedi. Destroy me. Confused by Vader's ploy, Luke hesitated. Only by taking revenge can you save yourself. Luke stood locked in place. Should he act on Vader's words and thus use the Force as a tool of revenge? Or should he step away from this battle now, hoping for another chance to fight Vader when he gained better control? No, how could he delay the opportunity to destroy this evil being? Here was his chance now, and he must not delay. There may never be another opportunity such as this. Luke grasped his deadly lightsaber in both hands, tightly gripping the smooth handle like an ancient broadsword and raising the weapon to deliver the blow that would slay this masked horror. But before he could swing, a large piece of machinery detached itself from the wall behind him and came hurtling at his back. Turning instantly, Luke flashed his lightsaber and cut the thing in half, and the two massive pieces crashed to the floor. A second piece of machinery sped toward the youth, and he again used the Force to deflect it. The weighty object bounced away as if it had struck an unseen shield. Then a large pipe came tumbling toward him through the air, but even as Luke repelled the enormous object, tools and pieces of machinery came flying at him from all directions. Then wires that pulled themselves out of the walls came twisting and sparking and whipping at him. Bombarded on all sides, Luke did what he could to deflect the assault, but he was beginning to get bloodied and bruised in the attempt. Another large piece of machinery glanced off Luke's body and crashed at the large window, letting in the screaming wind. Suddenly everything in the room was blown out, and the fierce wind lashed Luke's body and filled the room with a banshee-like howl. And in the very center of the room, standing still and triumphant, was Darth Vader. You are beaten, the Dark Lord of the Sith gloated. It is useless to resist. You will join me, or you will join Obi-Wan in death. As Vader spoke those words, a final piece of heavy machinery soared through the air, striking the young Jedi and knocking him through the broken window. Everything became a great blur as the wind carried him, tossing and rolling, and until he managed to grab a hold of a beam with one hand. When the wind subsided a bit and his vision cleared, Luke realized that he was hanging from the gantry of the reactor shaft outside the control room. When he gazed down, he saw what appeared to be an endless abyss. A wave of dizziness swept over him, and he squeezed his eyes closed in an effort to keep from panicking. I would do much the same. Compared to the pod-like reactor from which he hung, Luke was no more than a speck of squirming matter, while the pod itself, just one of many jutting from the circular light-dotted inner wall, was no more than a speck itself in comparison with the rest of the immense chamber. To give you an idea of the sheer size of the thing, I imagine. Excuse me 1 second, I'm getting lightheaded. I feel like... Okay. I was falling backwards. I don't know where that came from. Sorry about that. Grasping the beam firmly with only one hand, Luke managed to hook his lightsaber onto his belt and then grabbed the beam with both hands. Hoisting himself up, he scrambled on the gantry and stood on it, just in time to see Darth Vader walking down toward him. As Vader approached Luke, the public address system began to blare, echoing through the cavernous rooms. Fugitives heading toward platform 327. Secure all transports. All security forces on alert. Walking menacingly toward Luke, Vader predicted, "Your friends will never escape, and neither will you." Vader took another step, and Luke immediately raised his sword, ready to renew the battle. "You are beaten," Vader stated with horrifying certainty and finality. "It is useless to resist." But Luke did resist. He lunged at the Dark Lord with a vicious blow, bringing his sizzling laser blade to crash on Vader's armor and sear through the flesh. Vader staggered from the blow, and it seemed to Luke that he was in pain, but only for a moment. Then once again, Vader began to move toward him. Taking another step, the Dark Lord warned, "Don't let yourself be destroyed, as Obi-Wan was." Luke was breathing hard, cold sweat dropping from his forehead, but the sound of Ben's name instilled a sudden resolve in him. "Calm," he reminded himself, "be calm." But the grimly cloaked specter stalked toward him along the narrow gantry, and it seemed he wanted the young Jedi's life, or worse, his fragile soul. "Lando, Leia, and Chewbacca, don't you just hate when they leave you on a cliffhanger?" And the droids hurried down a corridor. They turned a corner and saw the door to the landing platform standing open. Through it they glimpsed the Millennium Falcon waiting for their escape. But suddenly the door slammed shut. Ducking into an alcove, the group saw a squad of stormtroopers charging them, their laser guns blasting as they ran. Chunks of wall and floor shattered and flew into the air as the impact of the ricocheting energy beams. Or with the impact. There we go. Sorry. Chewbacca growled, returning the stormtroopers' fire with savage Wookiee rage. He covered Leia, who punched desperately at the door's control panel, but the door failed to budge. "R2, 3PO called. The control panel, you can override the alert system." 3PO gestured at the panel, urging the little robot to hurry, pointing out a computer socket on the control board. R2 scooted toward the control panel, beeping and whistling as he scurried to help, twisting his body to avoid the burning laser bolts. Lando feverishly worked to connect his comlink with the panel's intercom. "This is Calrissian," he broadcast over the system. "The Empire is taking control of the city. I advise you to leave before more Imperial troops arrive." He switched off the communicator. Lando knew that he had done what he could to warn his people. His job now was to get his friends safely off the planet. Meanwhile, R2 removed a connector cover and inserted an extended computer arm into the waiting socket. The droid issued a short beep that suddenly turned into a wild robot scream. He began to quiver, his circuits lighting up in a mad display of flashing brilliance, and every orifice in his hull spewing smoke. Lando quickly pulled R2 away from the power socket. As the droid began to cool off, he directed a few wilted beeps 3PO's way. "Well, next time you pay more attention," 3PO replied defensively. "I'm not supposed to know power sockets from computer feeds. I'm an interpreter." "Anybody else got any ideas?" Leia shouted as she stood firing at the attacking stormtroopers. "Come on," Lando answered over the din of the battle. "We'll try another way." The wind that shrieked through the reactor shaft entirely absorbed the sounds of the clashing lightsabers. Luke moved agilely across the gantry and took refuge beneath a huge instrument panel to evade his pursuing foe. But Vader was there in an instant, his lightsaber thrashing down like a pulsating guillotine blade. cutting the instrument complex loose. The complex began to fall, but was abruptly caught by the wind and blown upward. An instant of distraction was all Vader needed. As the instrument panel floated away, Luke involuntarily glanced at it. At that second, the Dark Lord's laser blade came slashing down across Luke's hand, cutting it, and sending the youth's lightsaber flying. No! No, wait, I'm early. Let's see, I was going to do something. Hang on, okay. Okay. Just bear with me a moment. The pain was excruciating. Luke smelled the terrible odor of his own seared flesh and squeezed his forearm beneath his armpit to try and stop the agony. He stepped backward along the gantry until he reached its extreme end, stalked all the while by the black-garbed apparition. Abruptly, ominously, the wind subsided, and Luke realized he had nowhere else to go. There is no escape. The Dark Lord of the Sith warned, looming over Luke like a black angel of death. Don't make me destroy you. You are strong with the Force. Now you must learn to use the dark side. Join me, and together we will be more powerful than the Emperor. Come, I will complete your training, and we will rule the galaxy together. Luke refused to give in to Vader's taunts. I'll never join you. If you only knew the power of the dark side. Vader continued, Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. The mention of his father aroused Luke's anger. He told me enough. He told me you killed him. No, Vader replied calmly. I am your father. Stunned, Luke stared with disbelief at the black-clad warrior and then pulled away at this revelation. The two warriors stood staring at one another, father and son. No, that's not true, Luke said, refusing to believe what he had just heard. That's impossible. Search your feelings, Vader said, sounding like an evil version of Yoda. You know it to be true. Then Vader turned off the blade of his lightsaber and extended a steady and inviting hand. Bewildered and horror-stricken at Vader's words, Luke shouted... Oh, wait. Hang on. I'm stupid. Vader continued persuasively, Luke, you can destroy the Emperor. He has foreseen this. It is your destiny. Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son. Come with me. It is the only way. Luke's mind whirled with those words. Everything was finally beginning to coalesce in his brain. Or was it? He wondered if Vader was telling him the truth. If the training of Yoda, the teaching of saintly old Ben, his own strivings for good and his abhorrence of evil, if everything he had fought for were no more than a lie. He didn't want to believe Vader. He tried convincing himself that it was Vader who lied to him. But somehow he could feel the truth in the Dark Lord's words. But if Vader did speak the truth, why, he wondered, had Ben Kenobi lied to him? Why? His mind screamed louder than any wind the Dark Lord could ever summon against him. The answers no longer seemed to matter. His father. But the calmness that Ben himself and Yoda, the Jedi Master, had taught him, Luke Skywalker made perhaps what might be his final decision of all. Never, he shouted as he stepped out onto the empty abyss beneath him. For all its unperceived depth, Luke might as well have been falling to another galaxy. Darth Vader moved to the end of the gantry to watch as Luke tumbled away. A strong wind began to blow, billowing Vader's black cloak out behind him as he stood looking over the edge. Skywalker's body quickly plunged downward, toppling head over foot. The wounded Jedi desperately reached out to grab something to stop his fall. The Dark Lord watched until he saw the youth's body sucked into a large exhaust pipe in the side of the reactor shaft. When Luke vanished, Vader quickly turned and hurried off the platform. Luke sped through the exhaust shaft, trying to grab the sides to slow his fall, but the smooth, shiny sides of the gas pipe had no handholds or ridges for Luke to grasp. At last he came to the end of a tunnel-like pipe, his feet striking hard against the circular grill. The grill, which opened over an apparently bottomless drop, was knocked out by the impact of Luke's momentum. and he felt his body start to slide out through the opening. Frantically clawing at the smooth interior of the pipe, Luke began to call out for assistance. Ben, help me, he pleaded desperately. Even as he called out, it says at for some reason, even as he called out, I don't know. He felt his fingers slip along the inside of the pipe while his body inched ever closer to the yawning opening. Great, now I have to yawn. Cloud City was in chaos. As soon as Lando Calrissian's broadcast was heard throughout the city, its residents began to panic. Some of them packed a few belongings, others just rushed out into the streets seeking escape. Soon the streets were filled with running humans and aliens rushing chaotically through the city. Imperial stormtroopers charged after the fleeing inhabitants, exchanging laser fire with them in a raging. In one of the city's central corridors, Lando, Leia, and Chewbacca held off a squad of stormtroopers by blasting heavy rounds of laser bolts at the Imperial warriors. It was urgent that Lando and the others hold the ground, for they had come upon another entrance that would lead them to the landing platform if only R2 succeeded in opening the door. R2 was trying to remove the plate from this door's control panel, but because of the noise and distraction of the laser fire blasting around him, it was difficult for the little droid to concentrate on his work. He beeped to himself as he worked, sounding a bit befuddled to 3PO. "What are you talking about?" 3PO called to him. "We're not interested in the hyperdrive on the Millennium Falcon. It's fixed. Just tell the computer to open the door." Then, as Lando and Leia and Chewbacca edged toward the door, dodging heavy Imperial laser fire, R2 beeped triumphantly and the door snapped open. "R2, you did it!" 3PO exclaimed. The droid would have applauded had his other arm been attached. "I never doubted you for a second." "Hurry," Lando shouted, "or we'll never make it." The helpful R2 unit came through once again as the others dashed through the entrance. The stout robot sprayed out a thick fog, as dense as the clouds surrounding this world, that obscured his friends from the encroaching stormtroopers. Before the cloud had cleared, Lando and the others were racing toward platform 327. I really should have said platform 9 3/4 at some point. The stormtroopers followed, blasting at the small band of fugitives bolting toward the Millennium Falcon. Chewbacca and the robots boarded the freighter while Lando and Leia covered them with their blasters, cutting down still more of the Emperor's warriors. When the low-pitched roar of the Falcon's engines started and then rose to an ear-battering whine, Lando and Leia discharged a few more bolts of brilliant energy. Then they sprinted up the ramp. They entered the pirate ship, and and the main hatchway closed behind them. And as the ship began to move, they heard a barrage of Imperial laser fire that sounded as if the entire planet was splitting apart at its foundations. Luke could no longer slow his inexorable slide out the exhaust pipe. He slid the final few centimeters and then dropped through the cloudy atmosphere, his body spinning and his arms flailing to grip onto something solid. After what seemed like forever, he caught hold of an electronic weather vane that jutted out from the bowl-like underside of Cloud City. Winds buffeted him and clouds swirled around him as he held on tightly to the weather vane. But his strength was beginning to fail. He didn't think he could hang like this, suspended above the gaseous surface for much longer. All was very quiet in the Millennium Falcon cockpit. Leia, just catching her breath from their close escape, sat in Han Solo's chair. Thoughts of him rushed to her mind, but she tried not to worry about him, tried not to miss him. Behind the princess, looking over her shoulder out the front windscreen, stood a silent and exhausted Lando Calrissian. Slowly the ship began to move, picking up speed as it coursed along the landing platform. The giant Wookiee, in his old co-pilot's chair, threw a series of switches that brought a dancing array of lights across the ship's main control panel. Pulling the throttle, Chewbacca began to guide the ship upward to freedom. Clouds rushed by the cockpit windows, and everyone finally breathed with relief as the Millennium Falcon soared into a red-orange twilight sky. Luke managed to hook one of his legs over the electronic weather vane, but which continued to support his weight, but the air from the exhaust pipe rushed at him, making it difficult for him to keep from slipping off the vane. "Ben," he moaned in agony. "Ben. I'll do what I can." I'm stupid. Darth Vader strode onto the empty landing platform and watched the speck that was the Millennium Falcon disappear in the far distance. He turned to his two aides. "Bring my ship in," he commanded, and then he left, black robes flowing behind him to prepare for his journey. Somewhere near the supporting stalk of Cloud City, Luke spoke again, concentrating his mind on one whom he thought cared for him and might somehow come to his aid. He called Leia. Pitifully, he cried out again, "Leia." Just then, a large piece of the weather vane broke off and went hurtling off into the clouds far below. Luke tightened his grip on what remained of the vane and strained to hold on in the blast of air rushing at him from the pipe above. "It looks like 3 fighters," Lando said to Chewbacca as they watched the computer screen configurations. "We can outdistance them easily," he added, knowing the capabilities of the freighter as well as Han Solo did. Looking at Leia, he mourned the passing of his administratorship. "I knew that setup was too good to last," he moaned. "I'm going to miss it." But Leia seemed to be in a daze. She didn't acknowledge Lando's comments, but stared straight ahead of her as if transfixed. Then out of her dreamlike trance she spoke. "Luke," she said, as if responding to something she heard. "What?" Lando asked. "We've got to go back. Chewie, head for the bottom of the city." Lando looked at her in astonishment. "Wait a minute, we're not going back there." The Wookiee barked, for once in agreement with Lando. "No argument," Leia said firmly, assuming the dignity of one accustomed to having her orders obeyed. "Just do it. That's a command." "What about those fighters?" Lando argued as he pointed to the 3 TIE fighters closing in on them. He looked to Chewbacca for support, but growling menacingly, Chewbacca conveyed that he knew who was in command now. "Yeah." Okay, Lando quietly acquiesced. "Really, that word I get out no problem, but I stumble on support and other little words like that. I don't know." With all the grace and speed for which the Millennium Falcon was famed, the ship banked through the clouds and turned back toward the city, and as the freighter continued on what would become a suicide run, the 3 pursuing TIE fighters matched its turn. Luke Skywalker was unaware of the Millennium Falcon's approach. Barely conscious, he somehow maintained his hold on the creaking and swaying weather vane. The device bent under the weight of his body, then completely broke off from its foundation and sent Luke tumbling helplessly through the sky. And this time he knew there would be nothing for him to cling to as he fell. "Look!" Lando exclaimed, indicating a figure plunging in the distance. "Someone's falling!" Leia managed to remain calm. She knew that panic now would doom them all. "Get under him, Chewie," she told the pilot. "It's Luke." "Hey, I'm almost done with The Empire Strikes Back." Chewbacca immediately responded and carefully eased the Millennium Falcon on a descent trajectory. I feel like I didn't pronounce that right. "Lando," Leia called out, turning to him, "open the top hatch." As he rushed out of the cockpit, Lando thought it was a strategy, see what I mean? Worthy of Han Solo himself. Chewbacca and Leia could see Luke's plunging body more clearly, and the Wookiee guided the ship toward him. As Chewie retarded the ship's speed drastically, the plummeting form skimmed the window screen and then landed with a thud against the outer hull. Lando opened the upper hatch. In the distance, he glimpsed 3 TIE fighters approaching the Falcon, their laser guns brightening the twilight sky with streaks of hot destruction. Lando stretched his body out of the hatch and reached to grasp the battered warrior and pull him up inside the ship. Just then, the Falcon lurched as a bolt exploded near it and almost threw Luke's body overboard, but Lando caught his hand and held on tightly. That's a close one. The Millennium Falcon veered away from Cloud City and soared through the thick, billowing cloud cover. Swerving to avoid the blinding flak from the TIE fighters, Princess Leia and the Wookiee pilot struggled to keep their ship skyborne. But explosions burst all around the cockpit, the din competing with Chewbacca's howl as he frantically worked the controls. Leia switched on the intercom. "Lando, is he all right?" She shouted over the noise in the cockpit. "Lando, do you hear me?" From the rear of the cockpit, she heard the voice that wasn't Lando's. "He'll survive," Luke said faintly. Leia and Chewbacca turned to see Luke battered and bloody and wrapped in a blanket being held into the cockpit by Lando. The princess jumped up from her chair and hugged him ecstatically. Chewbacca, still trying to guide the ship out of the TIE Fighter's range of fire, threw back his head and barked in jubilation. Behind the Millennium Falcon, the planet of clouds was receding farther in the distance, but the TIE Fighters kept up their close pursuit, firing their laser weapons and rocking the pirate craft with each on-target hit, working diligently. In the Falcon's hold, R2-D2 struggled against the constant lunging and tossing to reassemble his golden friend, meticulously trying to undo the mistakes of the well-intentioned Wookiee. The little droid beeped as he performed the intricate task. Very good, the protocol droid praised. His head was on properly, and his second arm was nearly completely reattached. Good as new. R2 beeped apprehensively. No, R2, don't worry. I'm sure we'll make it this time. But in the cockpit, Lando was not so optimistic. He saw the warning lights on the control panel begin to flash. Suddenly, alarms all over the ship went on. The deflector shields are going. Excuse me. He reported to Leia and Chewbacca. Leia looked over Lando's shoulder and noticed another blip ominously large that had appeared on the radar scope. There's another ship, she said, much bigger and trying to cut us off. Luke quietly gazed out the cockpit window toward the starry void. Almost to himself, he said, "It's Vader." Admiral Piet approached Vader, who stood on the bridge of this, the greatest of all Imperial Star Destroyers, and stared out the windows. "They'll be in range of the tractor beam in moments," the Admiral reported confidently. "And their hyperdrive has been deactivated?" Vader asked. "Right after they were captured, sir." "Good," the giant black-robed figure said. "Prepare for the boarding and set your weapons for stun." The Millennium Falcon had so far managed to evade its TIE Fighter pursuers, but could it escape attack from the ominous Star Destroyer that pressed toward it ever closer? "We don't have any room for mistakes," Leia said, tensely watching the large blip on the monitors. "If my men said they fixed this baby, they fixed it," Lando assured her. "We've got nothing to worry about." "Sounds familiar," Leia mused to herself. The ship was rocked again by the concussion of another laser explosion, but at that moment a green light began flashing on the control panel. "The coordinates are set, Chewie. It's now or never." The Wookiee barked in agreement. He was ready for the hyperdrive escape. "Punch it!" Lando yelled. Chewbacca struggled as if to say it was worth a try. Shrugged. He pulled back on the lightspeed throttle, suddenly altering the sound of the ion engines. All aboard were praying in human and droid fashion that the system would work. They had no other hope of escape. But abruptly the sound choked and died, and Chewbacca roared a howl of desperate frustration. Again, the hyperdrive system had failed them. And still the Millennium Falcon lurched with the TIE Fighter's fire. From his Imperial Star Destroyer, Darth Vader watched in fascination as the TIE Fighters relentlessly fired at the Millennium Falcon. Vader's ship was closing in on the fleeing Falcon, and it wouldn't be long before the Dark Lord had Skywalker completely in his power. And Luke sensed it too. Quietly he gazed out, knowing that Vader was near, that his victory over the weakened Jedi would soon be complete. His body was battered, was exhausted, his spirit was prepared to succumb to his fate. There was no reason to fight anymore. There was nothing left to believe in. "Ben," he whispered in utter despair, "why didn't you tell me?" "You weren't ready." "What?" Lando tried to adjust some controls, and Chewbacca leaped from his chair to race to the hold. Leia took Chewbacca's seat and helped Lando as they flew the Falcon through the exploding flak. As the Wookiee ran into the hold, he passed R2, who was still working on 3PO. The R2 unit began to beep in great consternation as he scanned the Wookiee, frantically trying to fix the hyperdrive system. "I said we're doomed," the panicked 3PO told R2. "The lightspeed engines are malfunctioning again." R2 beeped as he connected a leg. "How could you know what's wrong?" the golden droid scoffed. "Ouch, mind my foot, and stop the chattering on so." Lando's voice sounded in the hold through the intercom. "Chewie, check the secondary deviation controls." Chewbacca dropped into the hold's pit. He fought to loosen a section of paneling with an enormous wrench, but it failed to budge. Roaring in frustration, he gripped the tool like a club and bashed the panel with all his strength. Suddenly, the cockpit control panel sprayed Lando and the princess with a shower of sparks. They jumped back in their seats in surprise, but Luke didn't seem to notice anything happening around him. His head hung in discouragement and deep pain. "I won't be able to resist him," he muttered softly. Again, Lando banked the Millennium Falcon, trying to shed its pursuers, but the distance between the freighter and the TIE fighters was narrowing by the moment. In the Millennium Falcon's hold, R2 raced to a control panel, leaving an outraged 3PO to stand sputtering in place as his one leg attached. R2 worked swiftly, relying on only mechanical instinct to reprogram the circuit board. Lights flashed brightly with each of R2's adjustments, when suddenly, from deep within the Falcon's hyperspeed engines, a new and powerful hum resonated throughout the ship. The freighter tilted suddenly, sending the whistling R2 droid rolling across the floor into the pit to land on the startled Chewbacca. I forgot about that. Lando, who had been standing near the control panel, tumbled back against the cockpit wall, but as he fell back, he saw the stars outside become blinding, infinite streaks of light. "We did it!" Lando yelled triumphantly. The Millennium Falcon had shot victoriously into hyperdrive. Darth Vader stood silently. He gazed at the black void where a moment before the Millennium Falcon had been. His deep black silence brought terror to the two men standing near him. Admiral Piet and his captain waited, chills of fear coursing through their bodies, and wondered how soon they would feel the invisible vice-like talons around their throats. But the Dark Lord did not move. He stood silently contemplative, with his hands behind his back. Then he turned and slowly walked off the bridge, his ebony cloak billowing behind him. See what I mean? That was a long chapter. I was kind of hoping I'd be done sooner, though. Anyway, this will be the second video for the day, and I actually have a longer video for you guys, now that I think about it. Anyway, wish me luck. We've got one more chapter for The Empire Strikes Back, and then I'm going to start reading Return of the Jedi, and I think I will go back and read the entirety of the Twilight series. Someone should let me know if they want me to, after I read, let me know if you want me to read Twilight, the original one, or should I just go straight into New Moon? Interesting fact, I actually read New Moon first. I never read Twilight up until, well, anyway, enough rambling. Let me know what you guys would be interested in, and until next time, goodbye everybody.